Brian joins me once again, but he's not alone. He's bringing his wonderful partner, Haley, and I'm really looking forward to bringing this conversation to you about how to successfully navigate conversations around pornography when you're dating somebody, courting, getting married, and beyond. And it's just incredible to hear Haley and Brian talk about how this journey has been for them, what they've learned about themselves and each other. And they really model so many healthy principles about ways we can come together, focus on supporting each other, and truly seeing each other for who we are instead of defining ourselves as a problem. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Haley and Brian. If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things, but our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio. Well, I am really looking forward to this conversation. So I've had many chats with Brian, but we are delighted to bring in Haley, Brian's wonderful partner. I'm sure many of you are so tired of hearing Brian and I talk endlessly about many things. So we're going to bring in a fresh perspective. So Haley, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks. I'm nervous, but excited to be a part of it finally.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that I'm so excited about is you reached out to me and asked to join this conversation. What were you thinking?
Well, to be fair, you were the first one who said that you wanted to do a podcast with me. So I have to clear the air there. But that was me just being brave and just finally wanting to do it. So
Awesome. I do remember bringing that up like several months ago. And then I'm like, maybe it's not Haley's thing. And then you kind of out of the blue, like, okay, I'm ready to do it. I was so excited to see that message.
Late Christmas present to you, I guess.
Oh. So really, I just kind of want to start with your story. I heard Brian kind of share his perspective on how you met and how things progressed. But I'd love to hear it on your end about how you met, how that early dating process was, and how conversations around things like pornography went.
Well, I can't say that it came up on the first date or even the second. But we met, and I actually asked him out, and then we went on a few dates. And I remember it was our fourth date, and we both love driving. And so we went out to some lake. I thought he could have killed me very easily, but we went out to this random lake and we parked. And I remember we just talked, and I feel like the later it gets, like the deeper the conversations always tend to get to. And so it started getting late, and we just started just kind of spilling our souls. And that night, so again, it was our fourth date, he just told me, like, he was quiet for a few seconds. We were sitting in the truck, and he just kind of turned and he's like, "Hey, I want you to know something." And I was like, "Okay." He's like, "I had a habit of pornography for a really long time, and I just wanted you to be aware of that." And I remember, I was a little bit surprised, but I feel like if I had heard that, or if I was anybody else, I probably would have just ran or freaked out or asked him to take me home or something. But there was this overwhelming just sense of peace, and there was no disappointment. There was no judgment. And I just felt like I knew I loved him, which is kind of a weird moment. I'm sure most people don't realize that they love him when he's like spilling his guts about, his past. But that was literally the moment that I knew that I loved him. And I was so impressed with how open he was and how forward he was with it, because he didn't have to tell me. Like, I didn't ask him straight out.
Yeah.
And so I was so impressed with how vulnerable he had been and honest. And I knew how much courage that must have taken. And I remember I just kind of paused for a few seconds and I was silent. And then I kind of like pounced on him. Like I was hugging him. I'm sure he thought I was going in for a kiss or something because we hadn't kissed at that point yet. So I probably freaked him out a little bit, but I just hugged him and I think I just said, thank you, something simple. But I don't know what could have been and probably what is for a lot of people, like this terrible moment of destruction and just, finality, like, yeah, we're not going to work out or something, was so full of admiration and respect and courage. And it was one of the most beautiful moments I think we've had. So that's kind of how it started. So.
Wow. I think I got the chills like 3 times just hear that. What was it about him sharing this where it's like, wow, that is the moment that I felt like I loved him?
That's such a good question. I was actually thinking about this today. I mean, like I said, he did not have to do it, right? He could have avoided it, pushed it to the side, never told me. But I feel like him telling me and being vulnerable and being open and having the courage to do so showed a certain amount of respect for me as a person.
Wow.
And sincerity on his part, that he was open, but also obviously working on it. Like it's something that's on his mind. And so I think those qualities just kind of combined. And obviously we'd gotten along up until that point and it just like all hit. And I'm sure it was something deeper, but yeah, it just felt like love. That's how I packaged all those emotions. So.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, that was a huge kind of risk for both of you. And there was a lot of trust there. And I like that you both kind of took it slow and took the time sharing, took the time responding. The other thing that stood out as you were talking is you said you were both kind of sharing your souls. You were both revealing things and sharing things and creating that safety that, we can hold space for each other.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that's a very important response to the question, when should I tell someone I'm dating about a struggle with pornography? Obviously, the first date might not be the right environment, and Haley might have run, who knows, but like that time was very vulnerable, and we were in this deep soul to soul conversation, and it felt right to bring up. I remember that because at the time it was very much a part of my day. I was like in correspondence with you a lot, and I loved all the work and learning I was doing. And so it was very much like a part of my life in a very positive way, not in the way that I like struggled with it as much anymore. But I do remember just being able to be confident in sharing it. And I'm glad that came off so well and led to a very good 4th date.
Yeah, I did.
Wow. Confidence in sharing it. There had been a pivot, a shift inside of you where this wasn't something you needed to bury. It was something that you felt comfortable sharing in the right moment with the right person.
Absolutely.
Wow. So I'm curious you've probably heard of pornography before and what you should do if you're dating someone who's struggling with pornography. I'm curious, like, did you have some of those thoughts, beliefs, or myths, or like, okay, this is my game plan. If I'm dating somebody, this comes up, this is my exit strategy. Like, I'm curious what your kind of understanding was prior to this conversation.
So there's kind of a story to go along with this, so some background that I think will answer your question pretty well. So growing up, my grandma, love her to death. She's always been a little bit paranoid, especially about her grandchildren, right? She just wants the best for us, and it comes from a place of complete love. But I remember in my later teenage years and when I was going to college and, going on all these scary first dates, I remember she sat me down one time and she told me, she's like, Haley, the first question that you need to ask a person you're on a date with is, do you watch pornography? I was like, Grandma, I'm I'm not gonna, it's like, that's not gonna be the first thing I ask on a first date. She's like, I'm serious, Haley. Like, you need to ask them, do you watch pornography? And without going into too much detail, her and my grandpa have had a pretty rough relationship because of some struggles around that issue. And so based on her own experiences, she was just trying to protect me. But anyway, I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to ask that. Right. So I went on tons of dates and I dated quite a few people. And I realize now that I like never asked them. And maybe it's from this fear that they'll say yes. Right. But I don't know. It just never happened. But when Brian told me, I don't know, I feel like all of that should have made me run. But after looking at their relationship, I realized how contentious it is. And I guess I wanted to be a little bit more open-minded and not define someone by what they did in the past. And so honestly, I don't know if it was just like a stroke of luck that I didn't run at that moment, or that I really just chose to be open-minded, but it was a conscious choice to not be judgmental about it.
Wow.
I don't know. But so yeah, there's some background leading up to it, but despite maybe the negative background or the negative experiences that my family have had, I somehow literally by just some stroke of luck was managed to be open-minded. So
Wow. Sounds like you were prepared. And I think about, you mentioned like feeling love in that moment, but love is an action. It is behavior. And you chose in that moment to act in a caring, loving way. And that can be difficult when you learn something new where there may have been a lot of fear and people in your family have been impacted. I'm curious, what were some of those fears that you may have had? Like, oh goodness, like pornography means this, or this is going to happen next, or this
right.
relationship's doomed.
Well, I mean, just looking at my grandparents' relationship, I was so scared that I was going to have a relationship like that, where they weren't super close, or where I feel like I couldn't trust my husband or significant other, or I couldn't be open to them or talk to them, or they were lying to me, or I wasn't enough, in different ways. And so those were definitely fears that I had. But maybe I just didn't pay attention to them as much as the other things, which I'm grateful for. But there were definitely moments where I think everyone thinks about that or fears that or is paranoid about that. So I won't say that they didn't exist, but overall they were somehow pretty minimal.
Yeah, but they were present.
Yeah.
I think that's what stands out to me is you kind of had that in the background and heard those things.
Right.
And grandma's like, oh, be careful.
Yeah.
Like that was there. You were able to hold that, but also see a human and recognize, oh, I'm getting to know this person. I'm able to open up, trust. This is something I feel like I can approach and pursue, and kind of hold all those things at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad. Glad fear didn't rule me, I guess, in that scenario.
Yeah. So that moment sounds like it was really powerful, really connecting. And it was a lot more about sharing and trusting than it was about like confessing and maybe police.
I'd agree with that.
And that has stayed true through our relationship so far. I don't feel like we're ever confessing. It's
right.
It's always a communication, a non-judgmental sharing. And I honestly think that has saved us from any big potential arguments or fights, because communication is such an essential part of any relationship. And so being able to confidently share rather than reluctantly confess is going to make a relationship so much better.
Yeah. I thought a lot about that principle. Are the things we doing strengthening this relationship, or are they eroding them? And I would say generally sharing strengthens relationships. Confessing things often doesn't. And so it really is the intention. Like, why are we having this conversation? Is it to bring us together, or is it to try to control another partner's habit or action? It might feel like that's our job and responsibility, and I want to do that, but that may not actually strengthen that relationship in the way that we want. And you two kind of from the start developed that and established that pattern. It sounds like that's continued for you.
Yeah, I feel like we are very open, like even about things that potentially could be awkward. Like I feel like if you just attack it at first and are just open and very clear, it makes things so much smoother and so much more enjoyable.
Absolutely.
So there's some ingredients right there. We open,
Mhm.
embrace the awkward, and be clear. I think a lot of the challenges in relationships come from these expectations or assumptions, and we don't want to talk about it because it is uncomfortable. It is awkward.
Mhm.
And so it remains very unclear and we become less open. But you were okay to have these conversations and be open about them.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. Sorry, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but just every conversation I think we've had, like even if it's hard at first, like that initial, wall, if you break it down, it's just so much more rewarding on the other side.
So I'm curious how this has progressed. So you went on a couple of dates. On the fourth date, Brian takes you out in the woods somewhere, but it happens well.
But we
Sounds so
survived.
bad. That sounds awful.
That turned out well. And just that visual of like you just embraced him. And that was such a connecting, powerful, loving moment. I'm curious how things progress from there, just in your relationship in general, but around sexual health and these conversations around expectations, but also about pornography throughout the rest of kind of the dating period.
You want to spearhead this one?
I can. Yeah.
Okay.
In all this, I want to make sure that it's said that this can and is hard. Communication is a very difficult skill, and it's something that you need to continue to work on and develop. And certainly with my struggle, having been on these podcasts and being very outspoken, I was a little bit more confident than maybe I should have been in talking about my struggle. And so for anyone out there who is in a relationship and hasn't told their partner, or even if it's not a romantic relationship, but just confiding, not confessing in someone, that just takes a lot of bravery and a lot of effort to put yourself out there in such a vulnerable way. And so as we've progressed in dating and now in marriage, it's been so beautiful to see that pattern repeat itself. And I think you touched on that a little bit earlier, that we kind of set that expectation early that we could be vulnerable with each other, and that vulnerability was going to be met with embrace and acceptance.
Ooh.
And for me, that's so powerful, because most of my life I'd spent hiding and not even putting myself out there to be accepted. And so to have someone literally hug me after a decade plus struggle that I thought was going to ruin my life, like there is no more beautiful response. Pun intended, beautiful person, beautiful response that I could have received with my vulnerability. And so it's just been so great to see that time and time again, that, I mean, no matter what it is, I've had vulnerabilities about work and not being exactly where I want to be as a husband and a provider, and being able to talk about that vulnerably and have Haley be so understanding, that means so much to me. So it's not just about sexuality, it's everything that's important to me and I value, I can confide in her and share.
And that goes both ways too. And I feel like there's never been an expectation where you have to tell me something or I have to tell you something. I feel like by giving each other space, there's more space for us personally to work through it, think through it, but then come to the other person with that vulnerability and like, hey, this is what I've been doing. And it's always been validated by the other person.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little in awe over here because you two sound so healthy. Figure out how you but like as I'm listening to you, there's like two parts where part of it is you have to be vulnerable and open up, and the other person needs to receive it. There's a dance there, and you're sharing kind of that dynamic that it takes both of you to truly share and embrace. And then that you kind of shift those roles and be there for each other, which I think is incredible. But the other thing I'm hearing is I'm hearing a lot of values, but not a lot of rules. And so these values are, we want to be open. We want to be loving. We want to embrace the uncomfortable. We want to be there for each other. But there's not like, but this is how we have to do it. Every Saturday night, here's an inventory of all the things that you didn't do and the things you left out around the house. And, did you have these kind of thoughts, or did you?
Oh, you would lose that one.
It's not like rigid and controlled about how you're doing this. There's just a lot of values that we really want the best for each other, and we trust each other, but there's not like these really firm, rigid rules about how you're going to accomplish them.
Are you saying that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I've obviously learned through this program and through this struggle that rigid rules are never really too good of an idea if you're looking to pursue your values. And so I think prioritizing the values that we have together, and I think we've established through communication and in talking to each other and talking about how we want our relationship to be, and then putting that into practice, I think those rules have just kind of been trumped by the value of we can trust each other, we can share vulnerably, but there's also room for space. Like I'm not going to force a response or force her to tell me secrets. I don't think that's healthy. And so there's still space for us to work on ourselves and figure out our own answers, like she said, but also like come to one another. And I think if you're looking for a trusting relationship, asking and forcing trust is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
True.
It's being trusting and being validating and leaving space for trust to even be in the relationship. If you're forcing it, if you're trying to control it, I feel like it's not going to be there.
That's it. And, just watching you two, sometimes I have to remind myself that we're having this chat, because just watching you two, you're just like leaning together. You're making eye contact with each other. You're listening. You're nodding along. You're engaged. But that space thing, I think, is so key. And it reminds me of this visual I just came across. I've been reading this ACT book for couples, and they share this beautiful visual that, as you are working on yourself and you become a whole, complete individual, you were like a mountain. And sometimes you want someone else to complete your mountain for you, and hoping that if I can control them and modify them in the right way, I will be complete. But this visual of a relationship, a healthy one, are two mountains coming together. And when those mountains come together, they create a space. And in that space between those mountains is a valley. And that allows rivers to flow and a new climate to emerge and life to be there. But those mountains can exist independently, and they are fine. But when they come together, they create something so much more. And that's what I'm hearing with that space, that, part of my mountain is I'm going to be open and share with you. And there's going to be the space we need for you to respond and grow as well. Like, you don't have to be a certain way for me to exist next to you. There's this space for things to grow in this relationship. And that just really comes across just hearing you talk.
Wow. I'm glad that we've started that trend since the beginning. Yeah, never expecting it, but always welcoming it. It's kind of our motto. Construction.
Brian's out. So the other thing you mentioned a couple times is that these are conversations. that you're having. It wasn't just one disclosure early on in our dating. And as Brian mentioned, we're talking about bigger things. We're talking about life and relationship. You're having intimate conversations, which occasionally includes things like sexuality, but it's not just focused on that one part of relationships. But I'm curious, when it came to pornography, was that just a single conversation you had on date 4, or were those conversations that kept evolving as you were dating?
Turn to me. So I'm sure, and we've talked about this, like so I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Like, they have come up, the conversations about those things have come up, but it's never been forced. And it's always been when he's wanted to come and talk to me about that, which I think have been great, not just while we were dating, but while married too. And I guess just kind of keeping with the trend of the conversation, by giving him space and not expecting him or making him promise, like, if something happens, like, you have to come tell me right away. I remember we had a conversation like that. I feel like he's been more willing to come and talk to me if something ever happens, or if he's having a struggle or worried about work. And I guess I'm just grateful for that. Sorry, I don't know if you have thoughts about that, but kind of the same thing.
I'm trying to think, like, if I were listening to this, like, what I would want to hear. And there are times I've chosen to pursue some, like, pretty difficult values in terms of, like, things that I really care about and that stress me out. And my mind has offered pornography as a way to cope with those emotions. And I've chosen to watch pornography because of that. And the few times it's happened, I notice myself, I'm like, dang it, like, all this work. And then I realize I get back into that mindful state, and I can realize what happened and go to Haley and say, you know what, like, I'm really stressed and anxious. And I remember I gave a like a fireside kind of a speaking, it was a speaking engagement, and I was super stressed about it. And so I had watched pornography, and I went to her, and the important thing wasn't my watching pornography. The important thing was why I was stressed and how we could figure that out. And her response was more about that and helping me deal with that stress than it was getting angry that I had watched pornography.
Wow.
And I feel like that is such a great, like, that is another beautiful response, because in the past, 5 years ago, if I would have watched pornography, I would have dwelt on it for weeks about how ashamed I was. But the things that I know and the way that she responded, 20 minutes later, I was feeling good, and we were laughing, and, like, it's crazy how better it is now in terms of communication and dealing with that struggle, and being able to talk and have conversations about pornography and sexuality, even if it isn't just like times I watched. Even outside of that, it's conversations about how we're going to talk to our future kids about sexuality and pornography, and how, I don't know, it's come up so naturally that I almost don't even notice it sometimes.
Yeah. They're not like conversations that you have a file and, like, oh, on September 20th, we had this chat.
Right.
Just conversations you have over the course of your relationship. And again, I'm hearing the evidence of those mountains, where it's like, yeah, these mountains are communicating. And as you're doing that, I mean, you're just growing so many wonderful things. And as humans, we struggle. Like, the weather changes and things get difficult and things get stressful. And when we do that, it sounds like you come together to say, how can I support you? like what's underlying this, instead of stop coughing. That symptom is disgusting and annoying. Don't do that anymore. It's like, no, let's actually address what's driving that. And that really is the value of a relationship, is supporting each other, learning together, and improving. And I think that conversation demonstrates that really well.
Thank you.
So Haley, I'm also wondering though, because I'm guessing you're not a machine
I
and you
hope
don't
not.
have just like this scripted, wonderful response every time.
I know. I'm so sorry.
No, but I wonder, like when Brian does say, like, yeah, I had an urge to view it. I did look at sexual images. Are there other like human reactions where it's like, oh gosh, like I did have this fear or this insecurity or this worry? So I think those are pretty normal automatic responses. And then we kind of regroup and chat and support. But I'm curious if there's other kind of responses in there too.
No, there for sure are. And I don't mean to downplay those at all. Like natural thoughts, like you said, as a wife, sometimes you feel like if they look at pornography, that you're not enough, that you aren't meeting their needs. And that could be physically or emotionally or mentally or intellectually or anything like that. And so it is natural to think of those. And I will have moments for sure when I feel that. And I think it does take a second to like think through it, realize that like he's taught me and like I've learned that there's something under that. It's just a symptom. And so in a way, I kind of talk to myself and be like, okay, like let's not focus on the symptom. Like in a way, it feels selfish to me to not focus on really what is like bothering him or stressing him or making him nervous, right? Because those are what leads to the viewing. And so I do kind of have to think about it for a while. But sometimes I do feel like I'm not enough, or I feel like I don't understand. You just feel like you don't know how to talk to him, or it can be awkward all over again. Like it's never I feel like sexuality can always have a awkward nature to it if you choose to make it awkward. And so those are all thoughts that I've definitely had for sure. So
I think that's the most common thing I've heard. Often, if a male is viewing and they have a female partner and they share it, it hits that like, oh, I'm not enough.
right.
And some way you fill in the blank, and our mind can generate a myriad of ways that we are not enough.
Yes.
I think that's one of the things our mind's the best at, is creatively thinking about all the ways we're not enough in our life.
It's
and in
true.
our
Too good sometimes.
Yes.
That's what our mind does. And I think that's the part that kind of pains me a lot about kind of pornography and relationships, is as we're having these really meaningful open conversations, it still hits us in a soft spot, and it can still hurt, and it can still kind of pull up some of those insecurities, and our mind goes to work like, yeah, you aren't enough, here's all the reasons why you aren't. But it sounds like you're able to just notice that, give it the time that you need, and come back to what's most helpful in this relationship. And that takes some time. That doesn't happen in a second, like, oh, insecure, oh, no, I'm not anymore. Like, how were you able to give yourself, I guess, first of all, how are you able to be aware of that process and then give yourself the time you need to then focus on the health of the relationship?
Well, I think it pays to have a husband who has talked about pornography, right, for 2 years, like openly. And so I learned a lot from him, but obviously not everyone probably has that same situation. And so I think educating yourself on it is super important to realize again that it's a symptom. But then being on, the other end of it, realizing how easy it is to let your brain run away and, say how terrible you are or how ugly you are or fat or, how bad you are at sexual things or something like that. Like there's, like you said, a myriad of ways. And so I think the mindfulness game, to bring that word into it, totally comes into play. Like being aware that that's so natural and so normal, but it's still easier said than done, right? To shut those thoughts down and to kind of turn and say like, okay, like this is okay, and I'm okay, and I am enough. And so I think there's a value of, I guess, an importance of knowing like your own self-worth and being able to give yourself positive self-talk all the time. And I think that I've been really trying to focus on, and I think everyone would benefit from, especially in marriage. Like we are enough. And as long as we're trying to help the other person, like, it's okay. So hopefully that answered the question.
That's it. That's mountain stuff, where it's like I've
Mountains.
creating my own mountain that I'm comfortable with myself, and I still have thoughts and these feelings and insecurities, but I'm able to talk through that with myself and have a really strong base. And sometimes we want our partner to be our base, and it just
Right.
doesn't work like
Yeah.
that. Like, we have to be taking care of ourselves and then cultivating that valley between those mountains. But it really does kind of start with that. And it sounds like you're very
Right.
aware of that. And that's probably been a lot of practice on your part as well.
Yeah. And I won't say it comes naturally, because it is hard. And I do have those thoughts a lot, but repetition's everything, right? It just kind of becomes muscle memory, hopefully,
Yep.
after long enough.
Yep. The other thing I kind of wonder is sometimes, like around porn, we have this, there could be this dynamic where one person has a problem and we're kind of supporting them through a problem. Like, does it go the other way too, where it's like, yeah, sometimes I engage in unhealthy coping when I'm stressed or feeling insecure. And Brian doesn't just focus on the symptom. He actually helps me address what's underlying that. And he supports me when I'm having a human moment too.
I have lots of human moments, I will say, especially now. I feel like in this age, there's just lots of big decisions, right? Getting married, a huge decision. Finishing college, that's a huge decision and a huge moment that leads to bigger and bigger decisions, trying to figure out when to start a family and what job to pick. So there's a lot of moments, at least recently, where those things have come up and I break down. I freak out. Like, it's hard and it's scary. And there are several moments where I'm just like, I need to take a bath, and I just go and I just cry because I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what to do with my life. And so that is my end, where I'm definitely falling apart. And then I don't know if you want to say, I guess, how you help me through that, but he's great and very open and validating. So
I will say I am not as good at giving as beautiful of responses as she is, but I try to be as validating as she has been the whole time that we've been together. And I think there is kind of a cliche statement that men repeat frequently, that we just don't understand women. And I think just being there and showing up and embracing and accepting and listening has certainly been my go-to. And then just being able to try and talk her through it. And sometimes those thoughts that are so natural on how, I don't know, our minds can kind of talk us into ruts and patterns that might not be the most healthy. I do try and focus on those and really trying to get to the bottom of that underlying concern. What's really driving the need to go take a bath
for 3 hours.
Because oftentimes it is it's the work and it's the stresses of everything that we're trying to build both independently and together. And so it's a balance.
Yeah.
And I love that sequence about how you laid it out. So I think sometimes we feel pressure of, I've got to say the right words. And it's like, well, there's not really right words. You mentioned like showing up, like physically being present and engaging and embracing. There's so many things that we do physically to show up. And then you mentioned listening. Like, I'm going to actually listen and hear and demonstrate that care. And then we can think through some things. That's often like the last step, but often we want to lead with that one.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like physically showing up, listening, caring, and then thinking through has been a pretty helpful kind of formula.
I would definitely agree with that. Sorry, I was thinking of that right before you said it, Cameron, so you were reading my mind. But the listening part, sometimes you just have to let it all out. And especially for me, like, when I'm having a hard time, sometimes I don't even know what I'm feeling or thinking until I have time, to just kind of let it out and kind of as it's coming out, organize it and like picture it. And I'm like, okay, that is what's going on. And he gives me plenty of time to do that. And I think that's very necessary. And I hope that it's the same the other way. Like if he's struggling, I want to give him time to literally just put everything out there. And then you can start, breaking it down, figuring out what's really the key issue. But then the questions are also really important, I think, after you've given that time. Asking just the most basic questions. Sometimes it like annoys me at first. I'm like, what do you mean? What do I mean? Or like, what do you mean? What do you think? Or like, how do you feel? And it really is so basic. But like, as I talk myself through it, after he asked the question, I'm like, okay, you're right. It is that simple. And it almost always is. But yeah, those questions really, really help. But they're, I think, the final step, like you said, in that sequence. So
yeah, I just get that visual of like what's going on in our brain, and we're overwhelmed and stressed. That amygdala is firing. Like there is no future and there is no solution. It's we got to stay in the tub for 3 hours and cry. Like there's nothing else. We got to look at porn. That's the only solution.
Right.
But as soon as we kind of calm that frontal lobe comes back online. It's like, oh yeah, there's plenty of options and solutions to it. But we forget that part. Like we got to calm that emotion piece. And there's lots of ways we do that, and we can't force it, and we can't control it, and we can't be afraid about it. That's just going to ramp it up. But we can show up and create space and help each other through that process. Because sometimes we're both activated, but sometimes one's activated and the other one isn't. And it's like, okay, we can help them kind of calm. And that can be a wonderful thing that these mountains bring to each other, is to help each other in those moments.
I love this mountain analogy.
Yeah, I do too.
I'm thinking of all kinds of like one might block the wind from the other one, and our thoughts are like rain, and sometimes it takes a few of our rocks down the hill into the valley. But
and as a science teacher, I'm thinking of all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Love it. It's a beautiful metaphor. The other thing I'm wondering, and you can choose not to answer any questions or not. That's why Brian's cue to get out of here.
He's like, I'm done.
But I'm curious. I mean, we both share a similar faith background and talk about how sacred sexuality is, and often intentionally choose to wait to have, sex until we're married. I'm curious if there was any, I'm sure there was lots of thoughts and conversations around like, I wonder how sex will go, because Brian's looked at a lot of sexual images. Like, how's this gonna go? Are things gonna go okay? Does he have more like rehearsing expectations? Like, I'm curious if that factored into just Brian's experiences looking at sexual images, and how that might play out, as you are intimate together.
I have a lot of thoughts on that, so I'm going to go ahead and start. So it wasn't that same night that he told me all about pornography, but there was another night, and it was interesting because I had work, and my work had just recently offered like free therapy, and I'd wanted to try it for so long. And so I was like, let's do it. So I did it. And obviously like this came up because it was such a recent thing in my life. And she's like, how are you handling it? I was like, well, I don't know. And then she made me write down like this huge list of questions that I had for Brian about like porn and how it could affect our relationship, or if we got married, like our marriage. And I literally had this list, and we were in the truck and we were parked in Provo. And I think I just kept going through them. Like I literally just went through all of them, and a lot of them were scary for me to ask. But I asked all of them. And one of them I do remember was like, do you think you watching porn will like put unhealthy expectations on what our sexual life would be like if we were married? And so those questions all came up pretty early, and I'm so glad that they did. But he answered again, very honestly, like always. And for that, I was grateful. But there was a lot of fear about what that could do, even if he did answer perfectly, right? Like you just never know what's going to happen. But we kept with the honest thing. We kept that trend going. And honestly, like, I feel like our sexual life has just been so pure and open and honest. And because of that, it's just fun and enjoyable. And we talk about this all the time. Like, we hope everyone like gets to have as much fun as we do and be as open about this, because we're sure that because of porn, maybe that ruins other people's, marriages. And we hope that's not the case, but we're very lucky. But it comes because we were open, because we asked those questions. And yeah, so.
Wow. You said like the two F words I was looking for there. So there was fear.
Yeah.
I was waiting to hear what you were going to say.
I know. I was like, I didn't remember cussing.
Like, oh my gosh, like what could happen? And that's, again, our minds, that's its job, is to think about, how is this all going to blow up? That's just what it does. And so we can let those stories kind of simmer and fester and take our little mountain into a volcano and blow the top off. But it's just like, here's my questions. Let's talk about it. Let's actually approach the fear. And that's challenging to do when fear's like, you need to run away. But really what we need to do in these relationships is we need to approach that fear and have a greater understanding. And those might be some questions that maybe Brian hasn't entertained. Maybe he has thought about some of those. But it's like, yeah, let's actually come to a greater understanding about this. But often for people, sex becomes very scary. But for me, sex should be quite fun. That's the other F word. And when I think about you two, I mean, I kind of follow you online. You do all kinds of fun adventures, activities, and it just sounds like you all are having so much fun. And for me, sex in a marriage is just another way to connect and have fun with each other. But often, because we don't talk about it and it is awkward and there's fears, it can be the last thing that's connecting and fun. But for me, that should be like one of the most fun connecting experiences that we have. And so I'm so glad it's been that way for both of you.
We are too. We are too.
How about on your end, Brian? Were there concerns like, goodness, I've watched a lot of stuff. Is that going to impact sex in my marriage?
Prior to all the education I've gotten, those were certainly prevalent. And I don't know, it's been so interesting to look at my experience, and having been in relationships before that were leading up to marriage. I remember that being a very scary concern, and one that I was terrified to voice. And so being in a completely different spot for our relationship was just such a blessing. And it's two-sided. Like, I'm so proud that Haley felt comfortable enough after that initial conversation to bring those questions to me, because like you said, like, those are terrifying to ask, because that's, I mean, like, you're asking those because it's kind of your future, right? Like, if you really love this person and have these conflicting feelings of, oh my gosh, is pornography going to make it like this and this and this? And so there's one side where she was so brave in asking those, and then me being able to be at a spot where I'm confident and educated in this struggle and can articulate clearly that most of those are just fear-based concerns that really don't have a lot of solid footing. And that's not me. And I remember hearing those and having like a visceral reaction to some of them, because they're all legitimate questions. Some of them are just really scary.
Yeah.
And so being able to address those right off the bat was honestly such a blessing, because maybe that wouldn't have happened and we would have progressed and like preparing to get married. And maybe I would have thought that she had those questions, but I didn't know how to bring them up. And so there really was like I haven't really had to think through this before. Sorry. I think it's so beautiful that we were both at a spot where we were comfortable enough with ourselves for her to ask, and then for me to be able to respond in a way that could comfort her and negate those myths or fears. And that theme again has led to the sexuality that we share and enjoy being so amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure not everyone feels at a place where they're comfortable enough to bring those up. And I think you said something cool, like it requires knowledge. Like you were knowledgeable enough about it and about yourself to answer them. And then just luckily, I happened to get help from someone who helped me write a list of questions. So I guess just my advice to people who might not feel comfortable or prepared would be to do those things, either physically write them down, have someone help you write them down, or like Brian, like get knowledgeable. Like if it's something you really want, right? I think all of us want a healthy sex life. Like make sure that you're taking the steps to make that happen.
And I think, sorry, just another thought, but like we still have questions about sexuality. And I think it's so cool that we like research that together. Like we both have questions, and it's something that like brings us closer together. And I certainly think there's room for space where we can each, I don't know, do research of our own, but like the fact that we enjoy that together is just a testament to the fact that like we are getting more knowledgeable, and as long as that's communicated and validated, like we're going to be able to progress within that space.
That is so important. And I'm sure that speaks to Haley's educator core.
Yes.
Think about anything that's important. We probably should do our homework. We should be informed. We should get quality resources. We should have mentors, people that have been there a little bit longer than us. But often when it comes to sexuality, the idea is like, this is so important, we're never going to learn anything about it. Well, that's guaranteed not to work so well. But the idea of, yeah, we actually need to learn and keep learning. That's a lifelong process. And I'm so glad you both did your due diligence. Like, here's my questions. This is what I don't know. Let's talk about it, because it's important. And I think about when I was dating my wife, we didn't know a whole lot. So we enrolled in a human sexuality course at the university together and took it. And we learned and asked all these questions, because it's like, I want this to actually be a really meaningful part of my relationship. And I have no idea like what most of this is about. So let's learn about this. So I think there's a lot of preparation. And now we've been married for like 15 years, and there's still so much learning that's taking place. And it's funny, this times those conversations come up, and it seems like whenever my wife and I are on a bike ride, and we love road biking, we're often kind of catching each other up, like, oh, what did you learn? What have you been reading? What podcasts have you listened to? And we're kind of teaching each other as we're kind of cruising down the road. That's our time to kind of catch up on what we're learning. And like, I love my bike rides, and I love the exercise. I love the connection. But we have like the best sexual health conversations as we're doing something else that we really enjoy. And like, all of that is just connecting. It's just something that you kind of do ongoing.
So true. I was literally just teaching him about space and Earth and ocean currents last night. Love that.
I love it. Well, I know Brian, he's done a bunch of these chats with me. And Haley, this is like your first. So how was this coming out here, sharing your thoughts and being so open about your experiences?
I was so nervous before, for sure, but I wasn't scared about sharing. I think it was just being able to articulate what I want to say in a way that people can understand and like internalize it. That was what I was most scared about. And so overall, hoping I didn't completely botch it, but I I was more excited than anything to just help, even if it was at my own expense or embarrassment or anything. And thankfully Brian's had a lot of experience with this, so that helps. So I know that if I blanked, I just turned to him. But I'm grateful. It is obviously a very vulnerable subject, but I think if more people are okay with being vulnerable, they'll be so much happier. So
Yeah, there's so many things, Haley, that you demonstrated and shared with us. And that last one I want to highlight there is you are living your values. And it's like, yeah, I felt nervous, I felt scared, I didn't want to say unhelpful things. But in the end, your value is I want to help people. And this has been a meaningful part of our journey. And so, yeah, even though this is nerve-wracking, that emotion can be there. There is space for that. And I'm going to live my value of helping other people. And that is what an educator is and what a good partner is. But you truly are demonstrating that my value is way more important than trying to run away from that discomfort.
right. That's a life motto right there.
It is.
So I just want to thank you both for sharing your thoughts. And really, there was just so much teaching, so much education, so much modeling about this is kind of what this can be like. And you both brought that human side that this is difficult. It's hard. It's ongoing conversations. There's still ongoing struggles. We're still humans. And our little mountains aren't flawless. They have avalanches and rock slides and things happen. But the other value that I saw with both of you is when things happen, we're going to come together and we're going to figure this out. And that's a core value that you can build on instead of, oh, when things happen, you got to figure it out on your own. Like that's something that's going to be quite disruptive for that little climate we're creating in this valley.
Right.
But for the two of you, it's like, yeah, when life happens and I'm stressed and overwhelmed and don't know where to go, we're going to come together.
Yeah, there's not much room for a valley right here, is there?
Beautiful. Any final thoughts or things you'd like to share for folks that have struggled with porn or partners that are wanting to support somebody? Just final things you want people to hear.
I'll go.
Mm-hmm.
I think early on, one of the most important things Haley said was being open-minded. And this applies to absolutely anyone, but there are stories and judgments and things that we hear that really influence our thoughts. And especially when it comes to pornography, it's very frightening words and betrayal and disloyal and trauma and divorce. And it's those words are scary. And to be able to go through our experience and have none of those words present means that isn't always the case. And there is a possibility that with education and vulnerability and love and not judging, that this struggle and I mean, any conversation that you have can, instead of be betraying and hurtful, it can be connecting and loving. And I think that's what we've been able to do in our relationship. Is a lot of scary conversations have actually been more connecting. And I think that's, in the end, I mean, that's what's going to help our marriage be enjoyable and long lasting and full of love. So that's what I'd say.
And then for me, I feel like that kind of ties in really well. Obviously, I had personal experience and close people to me who had some terrible experiences with porn. And whether you have close people or people that or just stories that you've heard or read, like you get to choose what your story is. and whether you want to follow your values or follow your fear. But it's always two-sided as well. And so making sure that your partner's on the same page with that. Like, you have to communicate, you have to be open about that, or you're never going to find out. So I guess just in summary, I would just say face your fear. Like, it's better to find out early and ask, and based on their response, then you can kind of judge for yourself. Because I think it's more about the response than about the habit, right? It's more about how they choose to communicate with you, because that's kind of indicative of what your marriage will be like. No judging, right? Validate vulnerability. Brian taught me that, and I've always remembered it. And like I said, you can choose to have a good marriage, and I think that we choose that, and we try to choose that every day. Not perfect, but we do.
Oh, it's beautiful. And what stands out is you two are in a relationship with each other. You're not in a relationship with an addict or with pornography. It's like you're in a relationship with each other. And as humans, we're coping with this world and experiences in our body in ways that are not always ideal. But in the end, we are in a relationship with each other, and not those stories and not those words and not pornography. And I think that's what makes the biggest difference. Is I think those things can be so scary, they kind of cloud our vision. And that's how we see our partner, as this problem. But we are never a problem. We are people. We are individuals. We can be partners. And you've both just done such a wonderful job being able to see each other clearly and noticing those thoughts and fears and beliefs, and actually looking at those things that are scary and creating space to see each other. And that's the key. And there'll be times where those thoughts go right in front of your face, and it's like, no, they are this problem. Well, let's step back. Oh, there's Haley. There's Brian. I'm going to keep choosing to come together and have these conversations. It was just beautiful to share this moment with the two of you and to learn from both of you. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And you're both definitely wiser beyond your years. It's just wonderful to listen to both of you.
Thank you. I'm sure you'll never want to do a podcast with me again. No one's going to want to listen to me anymore. So enjoy Haley.
It's not true. Thanks for making me face my fear.
It's wonderful. Anytime.
Deal.
Thank you.
See y'all. Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life, or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to LifeAfterPornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description, or just head over to lifeafterpornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.